right, welcome to the conversation on the Young Turks. So we got a great guest for you guys today. He's Mehdi Hassani, senior columnist for The Intercept. He also does a podcast for The Intercept called Deconstructed, and he's the host of Upfront on Al Jazeera English. Mehdi, great to have you back on, brother.
Thanks for having me on, Cenk. I hope you're safe and well and indoors.
We're all good. We're all good. Thank you. So you wrote a piece about how the Trump administration might be trying to sneak in a war with Iran while we're not looking. So that's interesting. We're going to get to that in a second. But today, some folks are animated, I suppose as most days, on whether Bernie should withdraw from the race. There's a recent story out about it. What's your take, Mehdi, given the state of the race? Yeah,
it's a great question. I don't know the answer, to be honest. I think, look, if it was me, I would have pulled out because I don't see a path to victory. There's talk of him, looking at the Wisconsin result, and if he loses by more than 15 or 20 or 25 or whatever it is, that will, push him to pull out. He's been making noises about pulling out in recent media interviews that he's been doing. There's reports that Fayez Shaka, his campaign manager, and others have said pull out, whereas others are saying stay in. I get the argument for staying in because they want to have as many delegates as possible to influence the platform at this virtual convention that might now be happening in the summer. But look, the fundamental problem I have with this argument, whether he stays in or stays out, is he had a long time to go after Joe Biden. And my problem with Bernie Sanders during this campaign is he made it very clear he wasn't going to go after Joe Biden. He wasn't going to do what had to be done in order to win the nomination. And that means knock Biden down and keep him down. And neither he nor Elizabeth Warren did that. And Joe Biden managed to stay in the race on the margins. People wrote him off, and fair play to him. He comes back and wins on Super Tuesday. But the problem is, even at that debate, that last debate, the one debate we saw between Bernie and Biden, he pulled his punches, and I have a problem with that.
There is a very small path to victory, but that path includes fire and ice. It includes actually going after Biden, making the case aggressively for why you're the right candidate and he isn't. And if you're talking about that, especially at this late date, you got to do things that Bernie's not willing to do. So is Biden in mental decline? Certainly looks like it. I have eyes, I have ears, I can see it. I'm not a medical expert. I can't know it for sure, but I'm really, really worried about it. Am I really worried about it because of the primary? No, I'm really worried about it because of the general election.
Did you see did you see the Trump line over the weekend where they read out a tweet of Biden's and Trump just said, he didn't write that tweet. He has people writing it for him. He's not even watching now. If he did, he doesn't even understand what's going on. And the problem with that line of attack is, as shameless as it is, as gratuitous as it is, as hypocritical as it is, it resonates with some people because a lot of people say, we might hate Trump and he might be a hypocrite, but, there's it's like with Hillary Clinton. There was a little bit of truth to those vicious attacks that he launched on her. Obviously, they were over the top, but there was some truth to the idea that she was an establishment politician. She liked wars. She liked Wall Street. The fact that Trump is all of those things and worse is irrelevant. That's not how politics works. And you hear a lot of liberals saying, well, he can't accuse Biden of being in mental decline. Look at his decline. That's not how it works, unfortunately. People aren't that fair.
Here's how it's going to go down. Even if the Biden team was tough enough to then make the videos about how Trump says oranges instead of origins and how he thinks wind causes cancer. And, he started at mental decline and has only gone down. But one, they won't be as vicious as they need to be. Two, they'll never be as vicious as Trump. Three, your best case scenario is a tie where people go, great, our two choices are two older white guys in mental decline. Great. Yeah. Thank you, Democratic Party. We really appreciate it. And
we know that low turnout helps the Republicans.
Are we going to lose? And I say we in this context. I'm a progressive. I'm going to vote against Trump. So has the Democratic Party made the same exact mistake as they did in 2016? And do we now stand an excellent chance of losing to Donald Trump again?
Definitely stand an excellent chance of losing to Donald Trump. When you say we, I would use we much more broadly. Are decent human beings, are non-racists, non-fascists going to lose in November to this racist, fascist, white nationalist? There's a lot at stake. He's an existential threat to American democracy and to minority communities in this country. It does, look at the polls. The polls suggest Joe Biden's going to win. of course, the polls also suggested Hillary Clinton was going to win. So the polls are a static snapshot of where we are today. There's a long time to go. A couple of months ago, if you and I are having this conversation, it would be a very different conversation. I wouldn't be sitting in my house having this conversation with you. So, things change very fast. But one constant is that Biden does look like he's a little bit past it. He doesn't look like he has the same energy that he did have in the past. I mean, you talk about vicious ads and going after Trump. One of Biden's advisors anonymously briefed the press last week that we can't attack Trump too hard right now. The American public doesn't want to see that. What? You don't want to attack the president right now who's literally getting Americans killed, who is handling this crisis in the worst possible way. If that is the attitude and mindset of Joe Biden, a guy who brags about working across the aisle, having Republican friends, calling Dick Cheney a great guy, giving eulogies at, racists' funerals, that's a problem. The only way he can win is, as you say, if he goes all out at Trump, takes advantage of all of Trump's weak spots. And I'll tell you what, the one change you have with 2016, and I wrote this piece over a year ago that Biden is Hillary 2.0, the one advantage he has is that Trump is a known quantity now in a way that he wasn't in 2016. And the second advantage he has is that he does seem to be doing better in the primaries, at least, with quote unquote white working class voters in the Rust Belt than Hillary Clinton did.
At the end of the day, I still have the refs as the number one problem. So you play a game and it's not fair to ask one side to be, 20 points, 40, 50 points better than the other side when the refs call every call in one direction. So, and I say that in this context. So if Biden loses, as we are afraid he's going to Donald Trump, the mainstream media, in my opinion, and I'm going to ask you, you're in the media. We're both not in mainstream media. You're at the Intercept. I'm at the Young Turks. So it's independent media that tries to hold people accountable. We do this old school thing sometimes called reporting, where we care about facts. But in the mainstream media, guaranteed that if Biden loses, they will not say, hey, Mehdi warned that he was Hillary Clinton 2.0. Cenk warned that he's about the only candidate who could lose to Donald Trump. They'll say it was our fault because we dared to criticize the establishment candidate 5% too much in the primaries. We warned about the iceberg of his mental decline. They'll say if it wasn't for you, the iceberg wouldn't exist. They'll say, we're predicting it ahead of time. I predicted it ahead of time last time. We did it. We're doing it again. So isn't the number one problem that the mainstream media is totally and utterly broken? And if they weren't broken, we wouldn't have these results. We might actually have a decent Democratic candidate.
Well, if the mainstream media wasn't broken, we wouldn't have Donald Trump as president. I mean, I don't believe Trump could have been president had it not been for the ridiculously fawning coverage, the free coverage, the nonstop rallies, and the lack of scrutiny that he got in 2015 and 2016. So for a start, you wouldn't have Trump. And then when it comes to the Democratic Party, you're right in terms of, the accusations. And, every time I point out a problem with Joe Biden on Twitter or anywhere else, the first response is, what about Bernie? And my point is, forget about Bernie. Bernie could pull out tomorrow, as you and I just discussed. He might pull out tomorrow. If he pulls out, the argument won't be, what about Bernie? The argument is, there is a problem with this candidate, separate to Bernie Sanders, separate to anything else. And I've made it very clear. I would take Amy Klobuchar, Mayor Pete, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris. I would take any of these quote-unquote centrists over Joe Biden. This is not about ideology anymore. Of course, I prefer a more progressive candidate. Of course, I'd have preferred a Warren or a Sanders. But the reality is right now, as you and I just said, you have a candidate who's extremely weak, looks eminently beatable in Joe Biden. And therefore, yes, I would take someone who's not in decline, who's got more of a killer instinct, who seems to know what's going on, who can operate a computer. And I just think, yes, there will be a lot of blame game go around. I think it's outrageous that after 2016, where they ran Hillary Clinton, the party comes back and runs Hillary Clinton 2.0 and then attacks the left, saying the left is unelectable, which seems weird. Can you imagine if Bernie had been the candidate in 2016 and then lost to Trump? You and I would have been told to shut up forever, and no left wing would even be allowed to run. They'd never been considered. And yet this time round, yet again, if the Martian landed on Earth, they would wonder what on earth is going on here. How have you learned so few lessons from 2016 that you can run such a similar candidate, similar campaign again? It's bizarre, beyond bizarre. What I would say, though, and this might be an unpopular view for some of your viewers, is that if it is a very narrow win by Donald Trump in 2016, if we see again, what was it, 77,000 votes in 3 states, which put him in the Oval Office, then yes, someone like me would say everyone needs to take responsibility for that. Yes, the Democrats ran a bad candidate. Yes, they may have run a bad campaign. But you know what? You can't just shirk your own responsibility as a voter. You may loathe Joe Biden, you may loathe Hillary Clinton, but you still have to make a choice. Ultimately, elections are not about your own feelings and how you feel. It's about whether you want your country to be a better place or a worse place, and you have to make decisions based on that. And I think everyone needs to be focused on, this is my personal view, getting rid of Donald Trump in November, who is an existential threat to American democracy in a way that no politician has been in modern American history as far back as I can remember.
Yeah, I hear you, Mehdi, but no. The responsibility is 100% on the Democratic Party.
You and I have to disagree on that. People have individual responsibility as well as members of the Democratic Society.
Hold on. No. Let me finish the thought. I am going to vote against Donald Trump, no matter what. I am. That's clear. And I'm going to make the case to vote against Donald Trump, no matter what, for the credible candidate against Donald Trump. But Anna made a devastating point on the show today, which is she thinks that the sexual assault allegations against Biden are very credible. And so now she says, you're asking me, a woman, to vote for someone who I think committed sexual assault. So thank you for putting me in this impossible situation. So if I and a lot of folks don't vote for Biden because we can't stomach it, it's not our fault. It's the fault of the Democratic Party that thrust this awful candidate on us.
No doubt. And I'm not excusing the Democratic Party for thrusting and it's not the party, it's also primary voters who made the mistake of choosing Biden as the electable person. Just on the sexual assault charge, let me just say this. You and I just mentioned this a moment ago. Should Bernie stay in or out? It's interesting that Bernie said not a word about this. If you're going to stay in and say you don't want Joe Biden to be the candidate, you need to reckon with this. Because once Bernie endorses Joe Biden, as he did with Hillary Clinton in 2016, people are going to ask him what he thinks about these allegations. He's not going to be able to stay silent. And it's madness that the Democratic Party are not prosecuting this now and not examining this now, because you think Donald Trump's not going to bring this up in the general election? Whether you think Tara Reade's allegations are credible or not, and I'm no one to judge whether they're credible or not, the point is that it is going to be an issue come the general election. Having said that, I would say, in response to Anna's point, unfortunately, liberals, progressives, Democrats, whatever you want to call it, across the world have voted for men with horrible records. In recent years, Bill Clinton was accused of rape, accused of all sorts of. Many people lined up and re-elected him as president. John F. Kennedy had all sorts of allegations against him. So, unfortunately, the reason they're called lesser of two evils, Cenk, is because they're both evil.
I'm here today to announce the program known as DACA is being rescinded.
We don't run our own country. We've lost our democracy, and all we have left is rage.
Where are the Democrats? I would be on every cable news channel screaming and yelling and talking about what the Republicans are doing right now.
How do you expect us to get excited to show up to the polls for these loser Democrats? How come we have nothing but cowards who'll never fight? Primaries are everything.
Building a great wall on the southern border.
You have politicians who fearmonger about disenfranchised groups.
The first attacker came through the visa lottery.
Now they are against legal immigrants.
Ending chain migration.
They don't want people from those countries coming here because they're fucking racist. This guy's an absolute monumental disgrace to all of us as Americans.
I ordered to launch precision strikes on targets.
That is what I was warning about for literally years on this program. This is what they promised they would do if they got into power, and what do you know? They did it.
I've now shown dozens of videos on the Young Turks of cops handcuffing people who are bleeding to death. His life means nothing. We have been trained to be cowards, so we're gonna handcuff that guy bleeding to death.
What does this law mean? These are all just basic BS coverings.
To every politician who is taking donations from the NRA, shame on you.
They said that this was impossible, but now we're beginning to move that boulder. And at the end, we'll get our democracy back. Primary the living hell out of these Democrats, and let's take over the party. That's a ghost ship. Let's board it, and let's take it.
I've been a fan of TYT, I believe, for the last 6 years.
5 years.
3 years now. 7 years.
4 years now.
2.5 years. I just started because she got me into it.
My boyfriend actually watches it every morning and every night, so I kind of just started watching it with him, and I love it. I mean, it's the only way that I find my news.
Looking through YouTube, looking for political shows that look cool.
I came across a very angry rant from Cenk, and that's when I knew.
So I was immediately in love with the show.
And then I haven't missed a live show since then.
10 times a day, I watched the show in the morning.
Whenever I had a bad day at high school, Young Turks.
Man, Cenk is just so blunt and honest, and I love the honesty, and there's no BS behind the news, and they just tell everything like it is.
There's nobody censoring them. There's nobody there to say you can't do this, you can't say that.
That feel of authenticity makes it seem like what they're saying is true.
I feel like I get the real story from the Young Turks.
I am TYT.
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 Mayweather will knock out Pacquiao. Floyd beats his wife.
Our system is inherently rigged against the will of the people.
They have 50% of the vote, and in a democracy, they should have 50% of the seats.
But if you live in an insanely gerrymandered district, your vote functionally doesn't matter.
We drew the map in a way that even though we get 50% of the vote, we're going to get 13 out of the 18 seats.
You don't actually have the ability to translate the will of the voters in your area into actual government policy.
They should not be allowed to gerrymander these districts. We should actually have a democracy.
Let's go on to your story because it's really important. So is the Trump team trying to start a war with Iran while we're all worried about coronavirus? Or is that overstating it?
Unfortunately, no, it's not overstating it. And you don't have to take it from me. As I point out in the piece, the New York Times got hold of a memo that was written by the top U.S. general on the ground, Robert White, in Iraq. He's the commanding officer of American forces working in the anti-ISIS coalition in Iraq. And he's written in a memo back to the Pentagon saying, if you keep telling me and my men to divert from our mission of fighting ISIS in Iraq and to go after these quote-unquote Iranian-backed militias, these anti-ISIS militias that were backed by Iran, if we pick a fight with them right now, that is going to lead to war between Iran and the United States. A very tough, blunt memo written by the top commanding officer. And this is Mike Pompeo in D.C., Secretary of State. This is Robert O'Brien, National Security Advisor. And the Times says, based on their conversations with people in the administration, that these two men have been pushing not just for conflict with Iranian-backed militias, but with Iran on the basis that Iran's diverted by a pandemic right now. So let's take advantage of that. Think what a sick mindset you have to look at people dying in Iran. Iran is one of the worst hit cases when it comes to COVID-19 globally, certainly in the Middle East. An Iranian dying every 10 minutes, I believe, was the last stat I looked at. Thousands dead so far, tens of thousands diagnosed with the disease. Imagine looking at that situation and not saying, you know what, let's do all we can to help our fellow human beings, regardless of our political differences, but saying, no, now's a good time for a war. Oh, and by the way, we're going to put a new round of sanctions on you too, which Pompeo did a couple of weeks ago. As I said in an earlier piece on the subject of Iran, it's almost as if we're governed by sociopaths here in the United States.
Yeah, in one of your pieces, because you wrote a couple, you reminded me of something that is now looking back at it sounds a little remarkable. Back then, it was actually fairly commonplace, but in the Trump era of viciousness, it seems unthinkable. Remind us what happened in 2003 when there was an earthquake in Iran.
Yeah, so there was an earthquake in Bamiyan in Iran. Some of your viewers may remember it was a vicious earthquake. Tens of thousands of people died. And at that time, I think it was December, it was the end of the year, and just over New Year, George W. Bush was president of the United States. He had given his Axis of Evil speech. He had invaded Iraq. The Iranians were on the defensive at the time. And yet, Bush and his administration suspended the sanctions that they had on Iran, sanctions on Iran go back a long way under different administrations of different parties. They suspended their sanctions and sent actual planes, cargo planes, military cargo planes, with supplies, with American doctors and personnel on board to Iran to help with the relief effort. It was the first time, I believe, American planes had landed in Iran since the revolution in 1979. And that was George W. Bush, a deeply vicious, deeply racist, warmongering president, supported by a soulless vice president in Dick Cheney. And yet even Bush Cheney said, hold on, there's an earthquake. Innocent people are dying. This is irrelevant to geopolitics. We can help them out and still hate them and still, demonize them and warmonger against them later. The Trump administration takes this disaster in Iran, another disaster, another humanitarian crisis, and says, behind the scenes, they say, let's ratchet up a conflict while they're distracted. And publicly, they say, you know what, we're going to put more sanctions on you. Imagine, it's bad enough that they have sanctions. People like Representative Ilhan Omar and other more progressive members of Congress have said, you need to suspend all these sanctions right now. Pompeo and co go the other direction. They say, no, we're not only not going to suspend them, we're going to bring in new sanctions in the middle of the worst public health crisis in modern history. It beggars belief. It's amazing. And, you go back to your point about low information voters and Joe Biden. Think about low information voters in US foreign policy. The only way elites in this country can get away with the that they do around the world is because people have no clue, don't follow it, don't understand it, don't read about it, don't get told about it. I refuse to believe that the majority of Americans in this country would be, including many Republicans, I would argue, would be okay if they discovered what the government is doing in their name to Iranian women and children, to Iranian doctors who can't get equipment or face masks or gowns, not because there's a shortage like there is here, but because the United States government is blocking other countries from supplying it to Iran. It's outrageous.
Look, there's so many things that the actual people wouldn't be in favor of if they knew it. Someone, credible reporting says it might have been the government of Israel, assassinated an Iranian physicist in front of his kids as he was picking them up from kindergarten. And just because he was one of the top physicists in Iran. Okay, is that what we do? Is that a great ally of ours? We don't know for sure that it was Israel. But whoever did it is monstrous. But we hide the things that go bump in the night if it's on our side. Look, and you're right, it is cross-party. Obama executed American citizens abroad without any judicial process, and the establishment gave him a standing ovation for it. Now, again, there are different layers and different levels, and Trump is, of course, more monstrous than even Dick Cheney, as you point out. So in this case, the top commander in Iraq, our commander, is warning about it. So, Mehdi, tell us, if they do go down this path of more conflict and war, what form would it take?
So that's a great question. And people have been arguing about this for a while. What would an American-Iran war look like? Because it's been on the table for so long, since the early 2000s. There have been war games. There have been scenarios put out by Pentagon war planners, by various think tanks in D.C. and across the world. And none of them are good. None of them come out with any kind of positive ending. You'd be surprised and shocked to discover, Cenk, they all end disastrously in some shape or form, either for the Americans or for Iranian civilians or both. And there are levels, because here's what's interesting. The hawks in D.C., John Bolton and co. and others, have always said, you can do limited targeted strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities and it'll be fine. They won't respond. On the other hand, they tell us that Iran can't have nuclear weapons because they're run by crazy suicidal fanatics. You can't have it both ways. Either they're run by crazy suicidal fanatics, in which case, if you attack them, they will go crazy and attack you back, or they're rational actors, in which case, why are you attacking them in the first place? So it's very bizarre, the contradiction that's presented. In terms of the ground war, what's going on right now, what O'Brien and Pompeo are pushing for are attacks on Iranian-backed militia groups in Iraq, because these groups have been ratcheting up their attacks on US personnel in Iran. Now, here's what's interesting, Jay. As you point out, people don't follow the news. It's always year zero. It's always day one. These attacks by the militias on the Americans are not the beginning either, because then you go back to New Year's. What happened at New Year's? Trump and co. assassinated not just a top Iranian general, Qasem Soleimani, and risked a war then. They also killed the commander of the Iranian-backed militias in Iraq, who was with Soleimani in that convoy. So, of course, those attacks were supposed to be, what were they? Acts of deterrence. The Trump administration told us we did this to establish a deterrent effect. Of course, it had no deterrent. It did the opposite. Like every time the Americans carry out a strike abroad, there's always blowback. The opposite was that these militias obviously are now attacking American soldiers in greater numbers. So what's fascinating is the Trump administration talks about maximum pressure. The problem with maximum pressure is that, A, it doesn't work, but not only does it not work, the response is always to go up, is always to escalate, not de-escalate. So we kill one of yours, you kill two of mine, we kill three of yours, you kill one of our top people, we kill your general. Where does it end? As you say, it could end in a full-scale confrontation between these two sides. What would that look like? Well, most military experts say that would make Iraq and Afghanistan look like a walk in the park. Iran is not Iraq. It has much more advanced defense systems. It has proxy groups throughout the world that are ready to attack its opponents on its behalf. It could send the global economy down the toilet, but the global economy is already going down the toilet. So imagine if you get oil and gas prices shooting up even more in this current coronavirus moment. So on every level, economic, political, humanitarian, a war with Iran would be a disaster. And that's why I wrote the piece, because the idea that O'Brien and Pompeo, egged on by Bolton on Twitter, we can just, we just kill a few more militia leaders in Iraq. It'll be fine. It won't lead to World War III. That kind of complacency is deeply disingenuous and deeply dangerous.
In a movie, if you had someone saying, hey, this country's in a lot of trouble, they're our adversary here, because they're beset by a pandemic, it's a humanitarian crisis, you got people dying left and right, so let's do a sneak attack on them while they're weak. That person in the movie is not the good guy. That person is the
he would
villain.
be the evil supervillain.
Yeah, that's right. So that's the situation we're in. Everybody check out Mehdi Hassan's writings at The Intercept. Also check out his podcast, Deconstructed, and, of course, his show on Al Jazeera English up front.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Young Turks. Anna Kasparian and John Idarola with you. Huge news day, lots of big updates on the Democratic primaries. Not necessarily good updates, but updates nonetheless. We also have some pretty disastrous updates when it comes to Donald Trump and his handling of this pandemic. As always, please help to support the show. We're doing our best to provide content for you in the middle of this pandemic, and your support means the world to us. So there are two ways you can do that. You can go to tyt.com/go, where we're raising some money in order to remain sustainable. And the second way, of course, is a long-standing way that you can support TYT, and it's to become a member. Go to tyt.com/join. Members get the whole show commercial-free whenever they want to watch it. And on top of that, all sorts of exclusive election coverage and, of course, the post-game show. John, how are you doing?
Oh, just happy to be alive, living my best life, all that stuff.
Yeah, right there with you.
Great day.
So, yeah, well, I'm happy that I get to do these stories with you today. It's always a pleasure doing the show with you, John. So why don't we just jump into it? Let's get it out of the way. Let's talk about some pretty devastating news when it comes to the primaries. So Bernie Sanders has officially dropped out of the Democratic primaries, indicating that now the Democratic nominee in the general election will, in fact, be Joe Biden. Let's hear what Senator Sanders had to say.
I wish I could give you better news, but I think you know the truth. And that is that we are now some 300 delegates behind Vice President Biden, and the path toward victory is virtually impossible. So while we are winning the ideological battle, and while we are winning the support of so many young people and working people throughout the country, I have concluded that this battle for the Democratic nomination will not be successful. And so today, I am announcing the suspension of my campaign. Please know that I do not make this decision lightly. In fact, it has been a very difficult and painful decision. I know that there may be some in our movement who disagree with this decision, who would like us to fight on to the last ballot cast at the Democratic Convention. I understand that position. But as I see the crisis gripping the nation, exacerbated by a president unwilling or unable to provide any kind of credible leadership, and the work that needs to be done to protect people in this most desperate hour, I cannot, in good conscience, continue to mount a campaign that cannot win and which would interfere with the important work required of all of us in this difficult hour.
So Sanders has always been very clear about how important he finds it to beat Donald Trump. I'm sure that there was mounting pressure for him to drop out. We had seen some reporting in various, to be fair, establishment news outlets about how there were members of his own campaign urging him to drop out in order to coalesce around Biden. Now, we're going to go to the statements that he made about Biden in just a second. But John, before we do that, I wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah, look, I think that there's probably behind the scenes pressure. We know that there was public pressure. I mean, virtually everyone on TV and in the Democratic Party has been implying that he needs to get out. He needs to get out ASAP. They were already basically like preemptively blaming him for Trump winning for staying in, even though he hadn't. And as you pointed out, I think on Twitter, he has now dropped out far sooner than Hillary Clinton did back in 2008 when she was running against Barack Obama. But it's also possible that he's looked at how the last few cycles of election days have gone, and he doesn't think that there's a path. I mean, the last time he was asked about this, a week or two ago, he said that there was a path. It was a slim one, but not much of a path. And it's a couple of months until, the next big set of elections, since so many have been postponed. And when you combine that with the crisis that's gripped the country, it is possible that he has made the calculation that it just wasn't going to happen, that he wasn't going to be able to do it.
So he talks a little bit about Joe Biden in this next clip, but he also talks about what he sees as the path forward for the progressive movement. Let's take a quick look at that.
Today, I congratulate Joe Biden, a very decent man, who I will work with to move our progressive ideas forward. On a practical note, let me also say this. I will stay on the ballot in all remaining states and continue to gather delegates. While Vice President Biden will be the nominee, we must continue working to assemble as many delegates as possible at the Democratic Convention, where we will be able to exert significant influence over the party platform and other functions. Then together, standing united, we will go forward to defeat Donald Trump, the most dangerous president in modern American history.
So he did not do like a full-throated endorsement of Biden, but I would argue dropping out now and referring to him as a very decent man, that's a strong statement. That is a strong statement. But that is what he says. But you know, it doesn't matter what Bernie Sanders has to say about Joe Biden. The establishment is still going to criticize him for not doing like a full-throated endorsement, you know, demanding that everyone like bow their head to Biden and talk about how incredible and wonderful he is. And then on the other hand, like, I'm really struggling. Believe it or not, I'm struggling more with this election than I did with the previous election in 2016. Because for all the things that I disagreed with Hillary Clinton about, you know, she was, of course, the eventual nominee. And I, you know, held my nose and decided to vote for her because I did understand the importance of beating Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton did not have a sexual assault allegation against her. And so I don't know how I feel about well, I do know how I feel about this, and I know I'll be shamed for talking about how I feel about this. Is this very decent man going to address the allegation against him? That's what I want to know. I can't refer to anyone as a decent person until they at least acknowledge the accusation against them and at least provide some evidence for why this person is supposedly not credible. Because so far I haven't seen anything other than citations of a pro-Russia blog she wrote on Medium. Oh, wow, she thinks that Russia is a great country. Who cares? That doesn't immediately cancel out a very credible and detailed sexual assault allegation that she put out against Biden. But I know I'm the bad guy for even mentioning it, I'm sure.
Well, among many other reasons. But no, I mean, and that's why people were trying to get it to be something that was raised to Biden early and not later. Because here's the thing, it is going to be raised. Could have been before the primary was over. Now it'll be during the debates against Donald Trump, perhaps by Donald Trump, by the way, because if anyone who's a big Biden supporter thinks that Trump he's just going to be too polite on the debate stage to bring it up. He's not going to mention it. Are you crazy? He's going to be talking about it. It might be the first thing out of his mouth when he stands on that debate stage with Joe Biden. And so it is going to be raised. We tried to raise it back when it could have been adjudicated, hopefully to everyone's satisfaction early on. And they avoided that. And so it will, like equivalent issues back during 2016, it will become a significant issue at literally the most dangerous time. That you can certainly guarantee.
So the other part of that video was where he mentioned the delegates. And I actually think, even though he's getting a lot of heat from Biden supporters for doing this, I think it's a smart strategy. Because what Bernie wants to do is accumulate enough delegates to apply political pressure on Biden. So he has to basically concede to some of the demands of progressive voters. I think that that's a smart strategy. He's trying to toe this line, Bernie is, between, you know, appeasing his progressive base, which I think he will always do right by, but also ensuring that, you know, he finds a path forward that ensures that Donald Trump doesn't get reelected. But at the same time, like, you have to consider that Biden himself as a candidate has significant weaknesses. So Bernie can fight as hard as he wants. The Biden supporters can fight as hard as they want. But ultimately, it's up to Joe Biden to deal with his weaknesses and his flaws in a way that would increase his base so he ends up defeating Donald Trump.
Yeah, look, I think Bernie is obviously, he's a smart guy, an experienced guy. I don't think that he picks his political strategies lightly or flippantly. And I'm sure that he acknowledges those flaws just as much as we do. He might not do it publicly quite as much, at least yet, but I'm sure he acknowledges it. And so he probably thinks that he has to do even more work. If he does believe it's as important as he says to defeat Donald Trump, and he understands how difficult a path that's going to be for Joe Biden, then that's probably one of the reasons why he's probably going to fairly early on work to get him elected. as, by the way, he has said that he will in interview after interview, debate after debate, question after question, article after article, stretching back for more than a year. Ad nauseum, they asked him over and over, no matter how many times he said it, and he is being consistent, as he always is, on everything.
So one other thing that I want to bring up is the reaction from Biden himself. And so he's at least signaled that he's willing to work with progressive voters on things that they want. And to be clear, progressive voters have already compiled a list of demands. So we'll talk about that. So Biden tweets the following: "We know how hard this is. You have put the interest of the nation and the need to defeat Donald Trump above all else. And for that, we're grateful. But we want you to know we'll be reaching out. You'll be heard by me. As you say, not me, us." And then he continues to say, "And to Bernie's supporters, I know that I need to earn your votes," which, by the way, already that's more than Hillary Clinton was ever willing to admit or say, right? So he knows he needs to earn progressive votes. "And I know that might take time, but I want you to know that I see you, I hear you, and I understand the urgency of this moment. I hope you'll join us. You're more than welcome. You're needed." So that's an admirable message. I'm going to be fair. But he has to put action behind those words. And look, I think I really don't want people to misunderstand me. For me, yes, he needs to cater to what progressive voters want if he wants to earn their vote. But even after that, like, the Democratic Party needs to address the allegations. They have to address it in a real way, because there are women out there who are uncomfortable casting their vote for any candidate, whether it's Trump or Biden, who has serious and credible allegations against them. So look, I understand the importance of getting Trump out, but you also have to deal with your own personal principles, morality, and I have my own moral compass. So if you're going to come back at me with, you know, Trump has multiple sexual assault allegations, Biden only has one, that doesn't make me feel any better. I just want them to address it. And the fact that they're trying to bury it, and the fact that they're smearing the woman who's come forward with the allegations, it's very similar to what we've seen Republicans do, especially when it came to Brett Kavanaugh. And I'm not okay with that. So that's one other thing that needs to be addressed.
Maybe they learned the wrong lesson from that. He's on the Supreme Court now.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
I mean, power is power, and they know how to pursue it. And the two issues that you just pointed out, the actual coming clean and addressing the allegations to whatever extent you can, as well as actually substantively courting the vote of progressives. You should not just do that because optically it looks good or because it might help you with that particular block of voters. You should do it because it's the morally correct thing to do, and also because it raises the chance that you'll actually win. And if that's what you actually want, and you're asserting that it is, then you should be doing these things. You should be at least as wise as Bernie Sanders is in pursuing this office that you say you want.
And I also want to just note that a number of progressive organizations like Justice Democrats and Next Gen America have put out a list of what they would like to see from the Biden campaign. Daniel Morans, who's a reporter from Huffington Post, tweeted about this, saying that Justice Democrats and Next Gen America and others urged Joe Biden in an open letter to court young voters with progressive policies. For so many young people, going back to the way things were before Trump isn't a motivating enough reason to cast a ballot. And their demands include 100% clean energy by 2030, government manufacture of generic drugs, half the number of incarcerated people, a wealth tax, and also a commitment to appointing officials who endorsed Bernie or Warren. So there are clear demands there. We'll see if there's actual action in proposing them, trying to accomplish them, as opposed to just lip service. But one thing that I will say, I guess, one piece of hopeful news or hopeful commentary is that Bernie and the movement that he's pushed for it's now gone beyond Bernie, right? So congressional races matter. Focus on that. Focus on getting progressives elected into Congress. I know that right now we don't have like a clear progressive leader for president in the future, but who knows what type of political talent we're going to develop or come across as this movement moves forward. It's not just about Bernie. I do think that it's important to keep fighting. I do think it's important to keep pushing the envelope when it comes to leftist policy proposals. And so let's try to focus on that and not allow this pretty heartbreaking day to stop us from the momentum that progressives have really created since 2016.
Yeah, and I would say that, like, some people are gonna need more time. I am not ready to just immediately today be all like, here's the next fight, let's go do it. I need a little bit of time to process it, and I don't think that that's wrong. But if you are ready to move forward, as Anna said, there are any number of candidates who are going to need your help. And more importantly than that, they need your help now more than they did yesterday and more than they did a month ago. Not having Bernie Sanders at the top of the ticket is going to hurt, primary contenders that might win their primaries and go on for good progressives, as well as the fact that because the coronavirus is going on right now in their primaries, they can't canvass. A lot of the sort of activity that allowed candidates like Ocasio-Cortez and others to win, they can't do. It's been cut off. And for those who can rely on name recognition and the money that they have, generally incumbents, that gives them even more of an advantage than usual, which means they're going to need your help. And as I say a lot, like, I know that a lot of people are probably feeling like, what's the point of any of this? Look what's happened, and just feeling like checking out. That's certainly what the
establishment wants. Mm-hmm.
And like I've said, like, if there would be no bigger failure for me personally, if the only thing I inspired you to do politically was to watch my show and support a president, honestly. And that's not true for everybody. Like, you think Tucker Carlson cares if you ever protest, if you ever join an organization? Like, no, watching his show is enough. And there are people like that online too. But no, you have to stay engaged. And if one door is closed, you got to go for another one, another door, a different window, something like that. There are lots of organizations and individuals that need your assistance, would be glad to have your assistance. And by the way, Bernie Sanders not done. So why should we be?
Yeah, that's such a great point. And we do want to hear from our audience about, where they stand. By the way, John's 100% right. It's totally okay to give yourself some time to process what's going on right now. I know that I'm there mentally. So for people who might be watching this thinking that, I had much more aggressive commentary, just give me a moment. Like, I just need to really process what's going on and think through how I'm feeling, what I'm thinking. And as this goes on, I'll be clearer with you guys about where I am. But we want to hear from you. So we do have a poll at tyt.com/vote. That's tyt.com/vote. We want to know who you're planning on voting for. So all the options are listed. A is Trump, B is Biden, C is someone else, meaning maybe you're going to write someone in, and D is not voting at all. So let us know what you guys think. Again, it's tyt.com/vote to participate in the poll, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. All right, so that conversation went a little longer than I expected. Why don't we take a quick break? But when we come back, we're going to continue talking about Bernie's decision, because while we've given you a response from Biden, there's a much more, I'm just going to keep it real, disgusting and dividing response from some Hillary Clinton staffers and from other people online who think that it's fun to mock the very people who they need to vote for their Democratic candidate. So we'll give you those details and more when we come back.
We're very honest that we're progressives. We call the Young Turks home of progressives, and we support progressive candidates.
There has been this reemergence of political activism, especially among young people.
This weekend was the second Women's March, both across the U.S. and across the world. So these people are not simply marching, they're not simply talking, they're also running for office. And when they do run, they're going to make a difference.
Joe Crowley is congressman from New York. He's very powerful. Why? He raised a lot of money. But there's someone finally challenging him.
We need to have representation that advocates as fiercely for working class people as possible from this seat.
If candidates like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez even get a little bit of media attention outside of what the Young Turks does, they have an excellent chance of winning.
She's going to win. She's going to win.
68% reporting.
The majority of Americans want Medicare for all. So I don't care what you and your corporate cronies want. What I care about is what the American people want.
We believe in total change. Everything runs on donor money. And that is what we will fight, and that is exactly why they don't like us.
We're having fun. It's election night.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has defeated Joe Crowley.
Here we go again.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Down goes Crowley. Down goes Crowley. Down goes Manafort. Down goes Cohen.
populist left wing with a gigantic victory in Mexico.
Senator Gillibrand, you have made a pledge to no longer accept corporate PAC money.
Women came out in record numbers in the primaries. They said, you'll be lucky to get one candidate. We now have 12 that have won their primaries. Bezos and Amazon announcing that they are going to go to a 15-hour minimum wage.
We're making progress. Let's keep going.
Many of these women made history.
The biggest victories, all women of color. Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, Sharice Davids and Deb Haaland. For a long time, we have not had progressives in power. It's going to be something to behold.
Welcome to Happy Hour, everybody. After a week of soul-crushing news, we break out the good stuff. Good news, good videos, good people, and, of course, drink good alcohol. That's the worst thing I've ever had.
This is the best show.
Full disclosure, we did do a shot right before the show began. It says,
let's
flamingo.
Flamingo.
The reason you had trouble with that word is it's not a word.
Okay.
This is the one of everything.
I've got a rash. Could I just put it on that to see if it'll take it off?
What did you used to think this was?
Bull piss.
Drink it, swallow it,
No.
spit it. Oh, that's needed after a day like this. Cheers to Brett Ehrlich. Climax. Uranus smells like farts. Because of course it does. This is the worst sketch ever of a perp. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen? They found the guy! This is Sophie's super happy dog story of the week.
This dog is so precious and deserves the world. I'm just not drinking that beer.
Here's my dog. This is Onyx.
Yeah, I would just say that he's exotic because he's not your traditional dog. Still 12 out of 10, because they're all good.
Well, if that made you happy, just wait till you see the best thing ever of the week. There is a woman who moves like a horse.
Why do I want to go home and like try this?
We're actually going to show you the running butthole challenge right now. What's happening? No, that's just wrong. Every way. And we'll see you next time.
Hey, Dave. As you can probably see, Skype froze. Frozen crashed.
You know, I'm watching that documentary on the Vietnam War, and there was a TV journalist in the middle of some tiny little village in Vietnam doing live TV as the soldiers were burning the Vietnamese huts, and it didn't crash. And that was 1965, and he was in Vietnam.
Hey everyone, welcome back to TYT. Anna Kasparian and John Idarola with you. Just a few announcements before we move on to the rest of our news. So if you are wondering, hey, where can I keep my money, especially at a time like now where major corporations are getting bailouts and things like that, a place where I feel my money is safe, it's an ethical institution. Aspiration is where you want to go. Go to aspiration.com/TYT. The financial institution is one of our partners for good reason. They do not invest money in the fossil fuel industry, and they're also environmentally conscious. In fact, they are planting trees. That's one of their latest missions, and you can learn more about it by checking them out. Aspiration.com/TYT. One other quick announcement, and you'll learn more about this as the week goes on, but I am going to be working on a project with a good friend of mine, Michael Brooks. We are putting a little programming together for Jacobin. And so I'll give you more details as soon as we have them available, but we're going to be launching soon. It'll be a fun weekend show, very different from what's going on here at TYT, and it will not impact my role at TYT at all. It's just something that he and I have been wanting to do for a while, and I think that it's going to be just an awesome, fun project together, just to keep this momentum for the progressive movement alive. We want to keep having these conversations. Again, it's not just about Bernie Sanders. It's about a movement beyond his candidacy. And we're hoping that we can keep that alive. All right, with that said, let's move on to the second half of our Bernie coverage today. So Bernie Sanders has officially dropped out of the Democratic primary race. He is still going to keep his name on the ballots in order to collect delegates. This is a way of him applying political pressure on Joe Biden so Biden can actually work with progressive voters towards some of the progressive policy proposals that they're demanding. So it's a strategy that I think is actually pretty smart. But of course, Bernie's announcement has led to some bad actors mocking his supporters, saying terrible things about Bernie, even though he's doing what he can to ensure that Donald Trump gets defeated. And so I want to give you the reaction from CNN specifically following Bernie Sanders' address to his supporters announcing that he is dropping out of the race.
What struck me the most there is Senator Sanders, in saying goodbye, did acknowledge that Joe Biden had an insurmountable lead, but he didn't say anything nice about Joe Biden. He did not say he'd spoken to him. He did not say he would work with him. He said it was imperative to beat President Trump, but there was no big embrace of Joe Biden. He said nicer things about Joe Biden back during some of the Democratic debates than he said in saying goodbye.
It was really noteworthy that was not part of his message at all. In fact, it's funny you say that. As he was speaking, I was texting with people in and around Joe Biden asking if he had gotten a phone call because it was so glaringly absent from Bernie Sanders' speech.
Wow, Dana Bash is really like on a losing streak lately with her commentary. Now, what did Bernie Sanders actually say about Joe Biden in his speech? I don't know. Let's take a look.
Today, I congratulate Joe Biden, a very decent man, who I will work with to move our progressive ideas forward.
He referred to Joe Biden as a very decent man. Understand that Bernie Sanders is addressing his supporters and explaining why he is suspending his campaign. And he was very clear in stating that he's suspending his campaign because he wants to do everything possible to defeat Donald Trump. What do you think that means? That means embracing Joe Biden as a candidate. Do they have problems with like listening comprehension? It seems like they do. I mean, what are they paid millions of dollars for? To like not listen to anything and then share incredibly ignorant commentary? It's amazing to me. Jesus Christ.
Yeah. There's a case to be made for some of them. Have you seen a Saliza list? But yeah, there were 4 people there. Combined, what would you say combined yearly salary for those 4? I mean,
Millions.
It's in the many millions. And not only did John King say something that was equal parts dumb and untrue, but none of the other 3 corrected him. Indeed, Dana Bash agreed with him when he very clearly did compliment Joe Biden. Probably will be attacked by some people for complimenting Joe Biden. He's also being attacked for supposedly not doing it. And that's the thing with Bernie Sanders. Like, I know you and I and others have been frustrated sometimes with the way he messages, the way he defends himself. But the thing that he always has to face is he will be attacked for everything he says, everything he doesn't say, and the inverse of both of those things. He's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't, damned in every possible way. Like, how is Bernie Sanders supposed to exist in a media environment where people can be so willfully dishonest about what he's saying, what they're directly responding to him saying and lying about it?
Let me just be clear about something. The way that they're handling this, that conversation on CNN is so counterproductive to what they want, because they are not incentivizing any type of unity whatsoever. On one hand, they believe that the onus is on progressives to unify. And then when progressives take the first step, when Bernie takes a massive step in suspending his campaign and referring to Joe Biden as a very decent man, okay, and talks about how we need to support the candidate who can defeat Donald Trump, like, he should be, I mean, based on what the establishment claims they want, based on what corporate media says they want, they should be celebrating that. But instead, they provide a disincentive by smearing Bernie Sanders and claiming that he didn't say something that he clearly freaking said. Like, why would anyone want to work with these types of people? Because you're right, damned if you do, damned if you don't. You're going to get hated on, you're going to get criticized, you're going to get mocked, you're going to get smeared, regardless of what you do.
Yeah.
He called Biden a very decent man and said he's suspending his campaign because he understands the importance of defeating Donald Trump. Come on.
Yeah. After running a campaign and engaging in debates and being far less than vicious, even as vicious as people who support him would want him to be against Biden, he ran a very he honestly does seem to see Joe Biden as a sort of friend, like a close colleague. He's been consistent about that. What he said tonight was pretty much what he's been saying every time he's talked about Joe Biden throughout this campaign. He has never once gotten any credit for that. He will never get any credit for that. We point out how many times that he did 43 events for Hillary Clinton. He's got more time now for Biden. What do you think he's going to do? Depending on the pandemic, is he going to do 50 events? Is he going to do 75, 150? Will he get any credit for the months and months of work that he's going to do to try to get people to vote for someone that isn't going to fight for those votes himself? He will get no credit for that.
I get that there's a pretty significant portion of the Democratic Party that never wants to take responsibility for anything, including the giant, obvious flaws of the candidate that they have propped up. They did it in 2016. They're doing it again now. I just want to make clear that if they want to defeat Donald Trump, they need to take responsibility. They need to tackle Joe Biden's flaws and do something about it immediately. And more importantly, because I'm seeing a lot of this today online, you need progressive votes in order to win. So mocking Bernie Sanders supporters, going after Breonna Joygray viciously on a day like today is going to do nothing for your cause. And you can go ahead and whine and cry about how Biden lost because progressives supposedly didn't give you anything and everything you wanted without even trying to cater to their needs or without even trying to appeal for their vote. But you got to take responsibility for your actions, and no one's buying it, right? Like the behavior that I'm seeing today is so ridiculous, and they just refuse to ever acknowledge how much they divide the party, how much they go against their own so-called message of unity.
Yeah.
And then one final example for you is what a bunch of Hillary staffers did recently. So BuzzFeed News reported that less than an hour after Bernie Sanders announced that he would be suspending his campaign, dozens of former Hillary Clinton staffers received a mass email with a link to a Zoom call. So BuzzFeed News writes, "Invitation, bye-bye, Bernard." And then it says, Hillary for America celebration toast. The email to former Hillary Clinton staffers read, "He's finally gone again. Join for a celebratory toast if you can. And yes, you can loop." And then also after, I'm sure this got a little bit of backlash, or maybe someone raised some concerns about putting something like that out there. Later on in the day, the name of the Zoom call had been changed to a more generic Hillary for America end of primary celebration toast with no mention of Sanders.
Still a toast. So she's not in it, so it's sort of weird to have the toast. Yeah, look, I know this isn't directly her, but look, she's done more than enough in the past few months. What a weird, sad life to just spend the rest of your life talking about Bernie Sanders. Like, we rightfully attacked Donald Trump for years later talking about the 2016 election. She is that is the thing she's going to talk about in media appearances for literally the rest of her life. If Joe Biden loses in November, I'd like to think that he's not going to spend his remaining years talking about Bernie Sanders. But for Hillary Clinton, that is the thing she wants to talk about, and that's it.
Because she felt that she was entitled to becoming president. And again, going back to the statement I was making before, she just refused to ever take responsibility for what she did wrong. Same with the DNC. And they have, unfortunately, already made the same mistakes, and they refuse to correct course. So this is my plea to the Democratic Party. If you want to beat Donald Trump, then show that you want to beat Donald Trump. Show that you take that seriously. Because so far, we haven't seen enough of that or much of that from the Democratic Party. I mean, propping up, in my opinion, the weakest Democratic candidate was mistake number one. But now we have him as the candidate. So what are you guys going to do to correct the course that we're on? Because it's not the type of course that's actually going to help us defeat Donald Trump. Anyway, all right, well, let's talk about Donald Trump, because he is a hideous person and he does hideous things, especially in the middle of this pandemic. So The federal government has been seizing orders of medical equipment that were supposed to go to various hospitals throughout the country. Now, there is a lack of transparency as to why this is happening. There's a lack of transparency when it comes to whether these hospitals will ever receive the supplies that they ordered themselves. But here's what we know so far, based on reporting from the Los Angeles Times and the New York Times. For instance, in Florida, a large medical system saw an order of thermometers taken away, and officials at a system in Massachusetts were unable to determine whether its order of masks went or where it went. Peace Health, a 10-hospital system in Washington, Oregon, and Alaska, had a shipment of testing supplies seized recently. So they make these orders. Obviously, right now, we're dealing with the federal government who has told states to fend for themselves, get the equipment and the medical supplies that you need on your own. Don't look to the federal government for any help. Don't look to our national stockpile because we're incompetent buffoons that didn't actually maintain and replenish that federal stockpile. And so hospitals are doing what they've been told to do. And then in the meantime, you have FEMA intercepting these deliveries and seizing the very medical supplies that these hospital administrators have ordered. In fact, Richard DiCarlo, who is the COO of Peace Health, was quoted as saying, "It's incredibly frustrating. We had put wheels in motion with testing and protective equipment to allow us to secure and protect our staff and our patients. When testing went off the table, we had to come up with a whole new plan." So you have all these hospital administrators who are adapting and they're doing what they can to deal with the situation that's in front of them, with this incompetent federal government and with this horrible pandemic. And then you have Trump basically telling FEMA to seize these shipments. Now, the lack of transparency is certainly an issue. Here's what we do know. Here's what FEMA has said. The Federal Emergency Management Agency is not publicly reporting the acquisitions, despite the outlay of millions of dollars of taxpayer money, nor has the administration detailed how it decides which supplies to seize and where to reroute them. Federal officials say they are trying to expedite the shipment to the United States of large quantities of medical supplies procured by private healthcare providers. But here's what really does concern me. FEMA allows those distributors to sell about half of the equipment to companies and counties that had previously placed orders. The other half of the shipments must be sold to counties that the federal government prioritizes by the severity of the outbreak, supposedly, based on data compiled by the CDC. Now, the reason why I say supposedly is because Donald Trump is the type of thin-skinned egomaniac that likes to retaliate against states that have not been overwhelmingly supportive of his presidency. So if he's seizing medical supplies that states have ordered, that doctors and hospitals have ordered, and he is making decisions as to where those supplies go, I'm very much concerned that those supplies are not going to end up going to the counties and the states that desperately need them, but they're going to end up going to places like Florida, for instance, where the governor has received 100% of the requests that he's made to the federal government because he's incredibly friendly to the Trump administration. That's the kind of stuff that I'm concerned about.
Yeah, and like under normal circumstances, we could be worried about incompetence and, bureaucracy getting in its own way. We've had disasters that the response has been mangled. And we've definitely had politicians where we worried that they were perhaps influenced by racial animus and bias, things like that, in their response to certain types of natural disasters. But the personal stuff in terms of Trump is like a new layer that I haven't really had to consider in past presidencies, where he is so clearly driven by his own personal political interest. As you pointed out, the thin-skinned way that he personalizes the relationship between the federal government and states and governors. And so with all of these moves, we have to worry, what are the FEMA heads being told? What contradictory information are they receiving from, for instance, potentially high-ranking medical experts on the one hand, and then people like Donald Trump or Jared Kushner or, whoever on the other? And it's a really terrible position to be in, where you look at these case counts go up day by day in different states and the death counts go up, and you just have to wonder, what if it wasn't Trump? What if it was someone else? Even if we were to bake in the horrifically slow response, let's say as of 2 weeks ago, Would Michigan have gotten more? Would California not have gotten a shipment of 100% broken ventilators, for instance? And New York in particular. Like it's a really terrible position to be in, where you have to worry that Donald Trump's personal anger, jealousy, or hatred towards individual politicians could result in people dying.
Absolutely. And just to provide a little bit of evidence that some states, some counties are being treated favorably by the Trump administration, the New York Times reported earlier this week that advisors to Jared Kushner have surprised FEMA officials in recent weeks to deploy supplies to communities after the area's representatives got through to Trump, even if the state had not yet gone through the formal process to secure supplies. So clearly, there are some stricter standards for certain parts of the country. But when it comes to local politicians who are nice to Trump, who have had conversations with Trump, they don't even have to go through the formal process in order to secure the medical supplies they need. And let me be clear about something. I think that every state, every county that requests these medical supplies should be able to get them, right? So I'm not saying, oh, we should hoard all of these supplies for blue states or blue counties. No. But what I am saying is that I do not trust the Trump administration to actually do an assessment that's fair and then determine where these supplies can go. One other thing that I'm concerned about, and everyone should be concerned about, is that Trump's administration has done nearly nothing when it comes to price gouging by private companies in the middle of this pandemic. And that's also disgusting. So there are people who are losing their lives right now. More than 14,000 Americans have already died because of the coronavirus. And Trump is playing political games because he doesn't care about their lives. He cares about his political career, and he cares about doing favors by people who have been willing to stroke his ego. And that's it. Yeah. Anyway. All right. We got to take a break. We have more news for you when we return.
I'm old enough that I remember when Captain Crunch put the berries in there.
Yay, crunch berries!
And I was like, ooh, the fake berries.
Remember?
We're gonna try that.
We did a story back in the day about how a woman sued, General Mills.
She'd been eating it for 4 years, believing that it was actual berries.
Yeah. She's like, these aren't real berries at all. I'm like, I got news for you. Captain Crunch isn't really a captain or a person. Joining me now, legendary whistleblower and American hero, Edward Snowden. First question is, hey, where are you?
I'm in my apartment in Moscow.
All of a sudden, in the studio, Jim Gaffigan, everybody.
Mental illness is, completely undiagnosed in our society.
It's not about a particular administration. It's about a broken system of power, and through that, really, the instrumentalization of a system of not justice, but injustice.
People understand whether they claim to deny climate change or not. Our collective house is in crisis. We're also dealing with the legacy of 40 years of economic policies that have made people's lives more precarious.
Sometimes you got to force people into their humanity. Sometimes you have to shake people into empathy.
Senator Elizabeth Warren joins us in the studio.
Healthcare is a basic human right, and we are fighting for basic human rights.
In order to actually achieve that vision of everyone having access to the same resources and getting to determine the outcome of their life, we have a lot of work to do, and it needs to start right now.
Here's something you may not know. When you deposit your money in a big bank, it doesn't just sit, safe and secure, in a vault. Instead, your money could end up building oil pipelines, mining for coal, or drilling in the Arctic. So if you're concerned about the planet, give your money something good to do. Make the move to green with Aspiration's fossil fuel-free account and join the thousands each week who are switching to save their dollars and save the planet at the same time.
Cenk Uygur joins us.
We are progressive and unapologetically so. Very happy to say that millennial and Gen Z generations are massively progressive along with us.
Democrats, they've been so weak for so long. For God's sake, fight for your side.
I would not like to compromise with Republicans. I would like to defeat them. Lynn, do you support Donald Trump?
Yes, I like Donald Trump.
Well, that's why we think you're racist. The 5 black kids in Central Park did not commit the rape. He said, who cares? Keep him in prison anyway. They probably did something. He's a terrible guy. Very fine people on the side chanting, Jews will not replace us. He says we should ban all Muslims. Well, that's bigotry by definition. He said it during the campaign trail over and over again. Called Latinos criminals and rapists. See, you're used to Republicans being strong on television and Democrats cowering. New day in America. Progressives, we actually fight back.
We found the perfect person to lead the Army, Allison Hartson.
The establishment media works hand in glove with our corporate legislators, and our corporate legislators work hand in glove with the corporation. And we're going to make it so that it's a decentralized force throughout the country so that we can quickly identify stories, quickly identify troll farms, and go in and neutralize the enemy, and then start building responsible media throughout the country and on every platform available.
Welcome back to TYT. Anna and John with you. We're going to get right to our next story. So this is not shocking, par for the course. Donald Trump has decided to attack the World Health Organization in the middle of a pandemic that has already killed more than 14,000 Americans. Okay, not to mention the countless people who have died already throughout the world. Now, Trump twice stated that the United States funds the majority of the organization's budget, but keep in mind that according to the World Health Organization, the United States provided 14.67% of its funding in 2018 to 2019. I just want to provide that fact check before you see Donald Trump's unhinged rant against the World Health Organization. Take a look.
WHO, that's the World Health Organization, receives vast amounts of money from the United States, and we pay for a majority, a biggest portion of their money. And they actually criticized and disagreed with my travel ban at the time I did it. And they were wrong. They've been wrong about a lot of things. And they had a lot of information early, and they didn't want to, they seemed to be very China-centric. They called it wrong. They called it wrong. They missed the call. They could have called it months earlier. They would have known. And they should have known, and they probably did know. So we'll be looking into that very carefully, and we're going to put a hold on money spent to the WHO. We're going to put a very powerful hold on it.
So you just heard him. He said we're going to put a very powerful hold on funding to the World Health Organization. And so since that's fresh in your minds, I want to just quickly go to the next clip because there were follow-up questions about it from reporters, and just changes his message depending on that exact moment or second. Take a look.
Is the time to freeze funding to the WHO during a pandemic?
No, maybe not. I mean, I'm not saying I'm going to do it, but we're going to look at it.
You did say that.
We give a tremendous, no, I didn't. I said we're going to look at it. We're going to investigate it. We're going to look at it. But we will look at ending funding. Yeah, because you know what? They called it wrong. And if you look back over the years even, they're very much, everything seems to be very biased toward China.
Okay, we're going to place a very strong hold on funding to the World Health Organization, and then all of a sudden he changes his message.
Well,
I mean,
to
this
be
man
fair, she said, you said you were going to freeze funding. And he didn't say he was going to put a very big freeze. He said a very big hold. He would have said a very cold freeze if that was what he was going to do. Yeah, no, he said he was going to do it. And it's because it doesn't matter. Like, just assume that we have basically a familial dictatorship that controls our country. And almost every expectation you'll have for how the rest of our time with Trump is going to go is pretty much going to be accurate at that point. And yeah, why not kill the funding to them and get more people killed? I mean, it's only been 15,000 reported deaths so far in America, 15,000 people that on election day in 2016 didn't realize then, but that Trump's stupidity, lack of respect for science, lack of empathy for their lives would result in them dying. They had a couple of years left. Basically, they had a terminal case of Donald Trump being president. And he's making sure that, God help us, we get past coronavirus. We're done. We don't think about coronavirus anymore. He is going to make us as vulnerable as possible for whatever happens after it, and the one that happens after that, because he doesn't care, because it doesn't affect him.
Yeah, it's his brand. It's what he does. I mean, understand the reason why he's targeting the World Health Organization right now, because he feels that they crossed him. The World Health Organization, in the early days of COVID-19, when, because it's a rapidly developing pandemic, right? And so in the early days, when the idea of banning travel from China was floated, the World Health Organization did say that they were against it. But obviously, they have changed their messaging quite a bit as this situation has evolved or devolved, okay? And understand that Donald Trump is just trying to retaliate because they had the audacity to disagree with him. But Donald Trump himself has been a complete and utter disaster when it comes to his inaction to prevent coronavirus from spreading. So as we know, as recently as mid-February, the Trump administration didn't take the coronavirus seriously at all. And they actually shipped quite a bit of medical supplies to China. Okay, so that's point number one. Point number two, very late in the game, Donald Trump did announce a travel ban, but he announced a travel ban from where? From Europe, with the exception of the UK, because he has businesses in the UK. I mean, everything that he's done has been based on his own personal political and financial interest. And then he has the audacity to turn to an international organization that we need in the middle of this pandemic and threaten to freeze funding. I'm going to put a very strong hold on funding.
Yeah, they called it wrong. All of them. Internationally, they called it wrong. Trump always knew what was going to happen. But I love particularly drawing a distinction between himself and the WHO on this. So it's a simplification, but sure, let's go with the simplification. He wanted to ban travel from all these countries, and they thought it was a bad idea. And they were so wrong, so stupid, because sure, that's the only thing he did, but he did it, and they were wrong, and it succeeded, and that's why nobody has coronavirus in America right now, because of how awesome a move that was to ban travel. You didn't have to do anything else. You could just, ignore it as weeks and weeks go by, and that's why nobody has coronavirus. He's a hell of a president. He really is.
On one hand, we have Donald Trump, who's been, again, a disaster, a complete disaster when it comes to the federal government's response to this pandemic. And then on the other hand, our other option is a presidential candidate who encouraged people to go vote yesterday in Wisconsin in person. It's people are dying, okay? We need leadership. We need leadership. I don't care about political party right now. I care about saving lives. I care about doing the responsible thing. And we are not left with much to work with right now. It's just people who live in their ivory towers who don't think that this, matters, doesn't affect them personally. But people are dying. Americans are dying in what's supposed to be the wealthiest country in the world, what's supposed to be the greatest country in the world. Our hospitals don't have enough beds. Our doctors don't have enough medical supplies. Our nurses don't have the protection they need to prevent themselves from getting this virus. This is what we're dealing with right now. It's just a complete and utter lack of leadership. And then you have actual medical experts who have to walk this fine line between informing the public, giving them the reality, and avoiding hurting Donald Trump's ego. Here's Anthony Fauci, who was asked about Trump's comments regarding the WHO.
Dr. Fauci, as you know, the president's very upset with the World Health Organization, thinks they've been too soft on China. Some of their predictions were far off in terms of human-to-human transmission and other matters. He wants to freeze U.S. funding to the World Health Organization. Do you agree?
You know, to be honest with you, I can't get involved in that kind of discussion. I just need to focus on what my job is, to see what we can do in this country and globally to put an end to this. The interaction between the WHO is something that I really prefer not to get involved with.
Because he can't get involved. If he crosses Donald Trump, he runs the risk of getting fired, because Trump likes to retaliate against people who don't agree with him 100% of the time. So I totally understand why Fauci wouldn't want to comment on that.
Yeah, Fauci. And then also there's reporting that a number of other doctors behind the scenes who work at the administration are being told not to talk publicly about hydroxychloroquine if it would potentially contradict what Donald Trump has said about the drug. Like, you're not supposed to talk about the side effects, the fact that it might kill people. Certainly don't bring up the fact that Donald Trump and others in the administration stand to make a lot of money if they sell a bunch of it. Because the science is given at best a backseat to Donald Trump's own personal and financial interests.
All right. Well, I'm going to skip ahead. Just a little note to Brett. I want to just quickly talk about Trump's firings, the Attorney General story. I know I'm skipping ahead. So with that said, Donald Trump has indicated that he plans on firing or replacing, I should say, more inspectors general. And that is a disastrous situation, because he wants to replace these watchdogs. These are supposed to be federal watchdogs with his loyalists. So Real Clear Politics was the first to report on this. Susan Crabtree tweeted the following: breaking, Trump is firing 7 IGs in one fell swoop. Sources confirmed to Real Clear News. Most likely will be the IGs that were appointed by President Obama or beforehand. He wants his own people in those positions now. Trump, during his briefing, said he has, quote, put in 7 names. Now, this has been a pretty big week for inspectors generals, because a lot of them have been let go. So, for instance, or if not let go, criticized pretty aggressively. So, for instance, there was Glenn Fine, who was the inspector general for the DOD. Trump has decided to let him go, but he was supposed to oversee the stimulus spending to ensure that there wouldn't be any fraud, to ensure that those bailouts didn't turn into a personal slush fund for the Trump administration. He's being replaced by a guy named Brian Miller. So let's talk about him a little bit. Trump tapped senior associate counsel to the president, Brian Miller, to assume one of the country's most important jobs. The special inspector general for pandemic recovery. The position would make Mr. Miller the watchdog for $500 billion or $500 billion Treasury Department bailout fund meant to rescue businesses stricken by coronavirus. Keep in mind that this was a person who was part of Trump's legal team during the impeachment investigation and helped to stop Congress from getting the documents it needed in the middle of that investigation.
Yeah, look, no matter what, we knew that fund was set up to be looted. I think the NBC News said, there's an expectation that up to $200 billion might be lost to fraud and corruption. And I was like, yeah, that's the whole thing. That's what it's designed to do. And of course, he's going to replace anyone that could be even hypothetically independent from him. That money's gone. It's out the door. It's going to go to these corporations. Maybe, ProPublica will have a write-up about the corruption in a couple of years. It'll be awesome, well-researched, and we'll never get the money back. And he's going to get rid of the rest of them. It's like I said just a segment ago. Just imagine that we have a familial dictatorship, and most of your predictions about what he's going to do are going to be accurate. Why would he abide by any sort of relatively independent IGs, or even IGs that have just been around for a long time? Like, he'll always say they served under Obama. It doesn't matter if they also served under George W. Bush beforehand. He's going to clear it out because there's no more oversight. We've already been through impeachment. We're not going to go back into it. He survived that. Now he can do whatever he wants. It's like we said, day after day, as you're going through that process. He is now freed up to do literally anything he wants, and he's simply acting on that.
This is why when Democrats are willing to concede to Republicans and offering a massive bailout to corporations who don't have to deal with the means testing that average citizens needed to deal with in order to qualify for stimulus, it's ridiculous to say, oh, but don't worry, we're going to ensure that there's oversight. First off, as we know, that oversight was weak to begin with. But whatever weak oversight they were able to accomplish in that legislation, Donald Trump doesn't care about rules. He's going to go in there and he's going to wipe away any type of oversight in order to personally benefit from those funds. All right. Our post game for our members is next. Become a member. Go to tyt.com/join. For everyone else, have an awesome night. We'll see you tomorrow. It's the post game. Even though like we're still trying to keep it profesh, okay, for the post game. I just feel like I don't know, like I always feel a little lighter when it's members only. Yeah.
Less accountability.
No, it's not that. It's like I don't know. It's like it's a smaller group of people. It's people that you know actually like you and or like the show, not you personally, but like the show and aren't hate watching. And I just feel like I'm among family. You get what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah. I don't get people who hate watch. Like
I don't.
The hardest thing, and it's part of my, I think it's part of my job, is to like watch some conservative programming just to know what the other side is saying. And also like to keep myself honest, because what if there's a blind spot that we have as progressives? You want to be aware of those things. And it is not an easy thing to do. I don't enjoy it. Like, I don't enjoy hate watching or hate listening to anything. But I don't know. Other people seem to like it. It's interesting.
Yeah, I don't like routinely watch The View. or anything. Just would anger me, and I'm already angry.
I know. But your beard's looking good.
Thank you. Yes, freshly brushed. Trying to keep it good.
Yes.
I'm eventually gonna have to trim it because I can't take it getting long. But we'll
Mm-hmm.
see.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about what Trump has to say about absentee ballots and mail-in voting. So, Donald Trump is allegedly not a fan of mail-in voting unless he's doing it himself. That became clear in one of his COVID-19 pressers, where he claimed that democracy is only allowed for people like him, but not for people like you. Take a look.
You were highly critical of mail-in voting, mail-in ballots for voting.
I think mail-in voting is
but
horrible.
You voted by
It's
mail
corrupt.
in Florida's election last month, didn't you?
Sure, I could vote by mail for that.
How do you reconcile
Because I'm
that?
allowed to. Well, that's called out of state. You know why I voted? Because I happen to be in the White House and I won't be able to go to Florida and vote.
the difference between mailing within
well, there's a
state or
big
mailing
difference
outside
between
state?
somebody that's out of state and does a ballot and everything sealed, certified, and everything else. You see what you have to do with the certifications. And you get thousands and thousands of people sitting in somebody's living room signing ballots all over the place. No, I think that mail-in voting is a terrible thing. I think if you vote, you should go. And even the concept of early voting is not the greatest because a lot of things happen. But it's okay. But you should go and you should vote. I think you should go and you should vote. You look at what they do, where they grab thousands of mail-in ballots and they dump it. I'll tell you what, and I don't have to tell you, you can look at the statistics. There's a lot of dishonesty going along with mail-in voting.
There's a lot of dishonesty going on with mail-in voting. Unless I'm doing the mail-in voting, that's when it's okay and it's sound and there's no fraud happening. But when other people do the mail-in voting, particularly people who tend to vote for Democrats, that's bad. That's fraud.
There's a lot of dishonesty around mail-in voting. For instance, what I've been saying today about mail-in voting.
That's 100%.
And you can look at the statistics. Okay, I did. You're lying. I wonder, do you ever wonder what it would be like if a regular awful Republican was president who stretched the truth or said things that were kind of manipulative or dishonest, but it was founded in truth? Like what it would be like to do this job responding to things that have elements of truth rather than just make up whatever you want to be true and say it, and then we'll show how it's untrue and nobody cares. Like he stood there knowing that he mail-in voted, attacking it. He could be doing this presser with an orangutan on his shoulders, talking about how primates are the worst and nobody should associate with them and they're terrible pets. And someone could point out, hey, there's a monkey on your shoulder, and he could say, no, it's I'm allowed. It's like primate, but they're terrible. You shouldn't be allowed to have them. It all feels so irrelevant. It feels like we're watching satire instead of real news. All those reporters still show up, but that doesn't mean that it's real in any way that matters.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these pressers have turned, they've been a circus, but they just keep getting worse. And he's so unbelievably adversarial toward reporters who ask him simple questions. There was one guy who wanted to ask about oil prices. And Donald Trump dismissed him because he's like, what's the price of oil? What's the price of oil? And he's like, I don't know today off the top of my head. And he just dismissed the reporter and moved on because he didn't know what the price of oil was that day. It's pathetic. And it's like he's applying his own gotcha questions to journalists when he doesn't want to answer any questions that he might see as loaded against him or whatever. But in that case, it wasn't even a question loaded against him. The guy was just like, oh, I wanted to ask you about oil prices. And that's when Trump jumped in with his nonsense. Go ahead.
And I'm sure you remember 2 weeks ago, the reporter asked him the ultimate softball question. It was, what would you say to Americans who are nervous and are scared and they want some reassurance? And he said, well, I'd say you're a terrible reporter. Dude, I just teed you up to be you have me, I have your back, I'm going to do what's necessary to protect you. Instead, he's like, F you, man. Don't come at me with that.
Yeah, he's really bad at recognizing layups. You're right. Yeah. But look, Trump is also unbelievably honest at times. And nothing made that clearer when he commented on the election reforms that Democrats were demanding as part of the stimulus bill. Here's what he had to say about those reforms.
I will tell you this. If you look at before and after, the things they had in there were crazy. They had things, levels of voting that if you ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again. They had things in there about, election days and what you do and all sorts of clawbacks. And they had things that were just totally crazy.
So the totally crazy things he's referring to is like same-day voter registration, stuff that we do need to reform our election so people aren't disenfranchised. But as we know, anyone who's been paying attention has seen how Republicans have disenfranchised voters. They've rolled back voting rights. They've done all sorts of things to basically rig this whole process in their favor. And Trump just admits it in an interview with Fox News. And that's it. No one else talks about it. We've shown that video at least 3 times on our show because it blows my mind every time we see it. Why isn't anyone else talking about it?
Yeah. Well, we talked about this morning on the Damage Report, but he actually forgot what you're supposed to do as a Republican. He should have said they have all this stuff that they put in there that would result in a Republican never winning. Crazy stuff. And he's supposed to say crazy stuff that would inspire fraud or something like that. He didn't even say that. He just said access is the thing that would make it actually impossible. And look, I've been saying for a long time that the analogy I give is that they're at war, not with Democrats, but with democracy. But that's actually flawed in a way, or it's at least behind the times. They have invaded democracy and they are now occupying it, and they have made it irrelevant. They've destroyed it from the inside. And this is not purely hypothetical. He is going to be tasked with, he's going to have to respond to legislation that'll come in the next month or two about how exactly we're going to prepare for the general election. And he is telegraphing right now that he is not going to support anything that allows people to actually vote. No money for mail voting, open weeks of voting, early voting, those sorts of things. He's going to reject those. So get ready now. We're going to be talking about it. I don't know if it's in a week or if it's in a month, but he is going to try to make it impossible for us to have an actual election come November.
I'm sure that the Democratic Party will fight him tooth and nail and that they will accomplish securing a true democratic process. I have faith in them. I think that they're going to do a great job with that. Especially with Biden referring to his call with Trump as pleasant. That wasn't the exact word he used, but he said nice things about Trump after having a conversation with him on the phone. What are you doing? What are you doing? You're running against him, and he's been a disaster. No, he is not good in any way. I mean, what we've been hearing from the DNC over and over again, and this is actually true, is we must defeat Donald Trump. Then act like it, act like it, act like it. If he is this giant threat, which I agree with, he is, then act like he's the threat. Don't refer to a phone call with him as something positive. He's a disaster, 100% disaster. God, on one hand, the DNC will shame you for criticizing Biden because we got to beat Trump. We got to beat Trump. We got to beat Trump. And then on the other hand, they're like, we're going to take it easy on Trump. No, let's not take it easy on Trump. Let's be vicious toward Trump.
Yeah.
But they're way more vicious toward progressive candidates and progressive voters than they are against Donald Trump. It's incredible.
Yeah, he's acting like he wanted to defeat progressives and he wants to hang out with Trump. Like he's hoping to set up a movie night. I don't know. He wants it to be pleasant. I know that.
Oh, movie night sounds so good, John. Not with Trump.
We've been doing it, actually.
I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, let's talk about some misinformation coming from Fox. So earlier there had been some reporting indicating that Fox was concerned about possible lawsuits due to the misinformation that they spread in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, if they were worried about lawsuits, they're certainly not showing it today because some of their segments continue to spread misinformation, including what you're about to watch. So on Tucker Carlson's show, there was a conversation with Fox News host Brit Hume, and they questioned whether all of this social distancing is needed in the first place.
So the question should be raised, was this the right call? And is it really true that the reason that we're beginning to think we may have turned the corner on this because we all did what the doctors said we should do, or is it because the disease turned out not to be quite as dangerous as we thought? And we're going to be debating that, I think, Tucker, for a long time to come.
No, we're not. No, we're not going to debate that. Today, the death toll passed 14,000 people in America. And that number is going to continue rising. No. There is no debate. Fox News is a complete disgrace, and that network 100% has blood on its hands because of the misinformation they're putting out there. It's amazing.
Yeah. They can't quite catch up with Trump in terms of responsibility because he actually has power. But in terms of misinformation, they've done the most harm because they've done it, constantly for literally months now, and they've influenced Trump. And he's gone along with them. Like, he's having meetings with Laura Ingraham about hydroxychloroquine. Like, he just did that a couple of days ago. Like, they are intertwined on this issue. And the sort of stuff that he was just saying, and I believe Harris Faulkner had said something today to the effect of that the numbers are being elevated. Like, last week, that was a crazy thing on the online only version of Fox that Diamond and Silk said. It took 1 week for it to go to their straight news reporters. And it's spreading. Tucker Carlson, his show last night, was just all about how it's not that bad. Only like 13,000 people, only 2,000 people in one day died. Bill O'Reilly is saying most of them were on their last legs anyway, talking with Sean Hannity, because despite all of, what we found out about Bill O'Reilly, Sean Hannity is still having on his show constantly. It took 1 week for it to go from the wackadoodles to it's just everybody saying it now. And so when the number gets to 25 or 50 or 100 or whatever, don't expect there to be any reckoning. They're not going to accept that that's even true. And every one of their voters is going to simply take it as a given that those numbers are completely fabricated.
So as the death toll climbs, as the body count increases, you're right, people like Tucker Carlson questioning the legitimacy of the official death toll. So let's hear what he has to say.
There is nuance within those numbers, as there always is in social science. For many years, the CDC has tracked the total number of Americans who die every week from pneumonia. For the last few weeks, that number has come in far lower than at the same moment in previous years. How could that be? Well, it seems entirely possible that doctors are classifying conventional pneumonia deaths as COVID-19 deaths. And that would mean this epidemic is being credited for thousands of deaths that would have occurred if the virus never appeared here. We don't know that for certain, but it's certainly worth considering. Something is skewing those numbers.
There is something skewing the numbers. The thing that's skewing the numbers is the lack of availability for testing, which means that the number of people who have officially been counted as people who have contracted the virus is an underestimate. Underestimate, meaning that the numbers are actually much higher. You moron.
Yeah.
In New York, irresponsible piece of crap. That's what Tucker Carlson is. That's why anytime he does a segment where he seems to agree with people on the left, I'm not interested in showing that segment on this show because he deserves 0% credit 100% of the time. He's trash. What he just said there is so dangerous. He never deserves credit. He is risking people's lives with that kind of misinformation.
He is a complete con artist, and it just pains me every time people fall for it. He throws a couple of bones that he doesn't actually believe, and he does it to get people to continue to support the right-wing politicians and the white supremacy that his show is founded on. That's it. That's all it is. And I can't believe that people don't see that. He's talking about pneumonia, which he doesn't even understand. I just saw in New York this morning they were saying on a given day in New York, 20 to 25 people in general die at home. These days, that number is 10 times higher. Now, we might believe that that's just a random increase that just happened, but most of those people are not being counted as coronavirus deaths because they died at home without ever being tested for coronavirus. But it's sort of a weird coincidence that a couple hundred people per day are dying at home in New York City alone as they're in the grip of the pandemic. Kind of seems like maybe some of those people aren't being counted and should. He doesn't seem as interested in that, though. He's doing this analysis. He's very interested in social science and its faults, but he's not interested in who we might be missing. And by the way, if you're one of those people that actually believes, no, Tucker Carlson, I disagree with him, but he's an honest guy. Do you believe for 1 second that if Barack Obama was still president, he would be doing this analysis of whether pneumonia numbers are being perhaps skewed in some way? Does anyone think that this is that the purpose of this is anything other than defending Donald Trump from the criticism that he has worked overtime for the past few months to earn?
So today we got news that the father of a family friend of my partner's passed away from coronavirus. He was an older guy, and his son, who's a Trump supporter, put out like a very heartfelt message and said that he had failed his father. And why did he fail his father? He didn't get into these details, but he had been posting all sorts of pro-Trump propaganda on social media, minimizing COVID-19, downplaying how lethal it is. So yeah, you did. You failed your father. That is what you did by thinking that this is just a joke. And I know that's a harsh thing to say to someone who just lost their father, but time to diversify your news diet. Because if you're getting news from the likes of Tucker Carlson, you're literally putting your life and the lives of your loved ones at risk. It's just so sad. Yeah, I mean, look, we're all really struggling now for obvious reasons. It's likely that most of us are going to know someone maybe even really close to us who's going to be affected by this virus. What makes it even harder, though, is you have to cope with that emotional aspect of it on top of working as hard as you can to debunk the misinformation that these bad actors put out there.
Yeah, and we're trying.
Yeah. Anyway, and thank you to all our members for supporting us through this, because we couldn't do it without you. We really couldn't. One more story for you. And this is something you're unlikely to see on Fox, but every once in a while, you'll see them go up against Trump. So let's discuss it. So recently, during one of Donald Trump's circus COVID-19 pressers, he decided to viciously attack ABC News reporter John Karl. Now, John Karl was asking him a question about his decision to fire the inspector general for the intelligence community. Trump lost it at that point and started calling him things like, "You're a third-rate reporter." Well, Bret Baier of Fox News, of all people, decided to defend John Karl. So let's take a quick look at what he had to say.
The president, pushes back very hard on things that he perceives as an attack. I think, John Karl is not a third-rate reporter. He's been around. He's the president of the White House Press Correspondents Association. Those give and takes are the president in his element, and I think we're going to see more of that. We'll see if we see it today. He was a bit salty yesterday, it seemed, to some of those questions at the press briefing.
So I want to make one quick clarification. John Karl was actually asking about an inspector general report done by Christy Grimm on the basically from Health and Human Services. It was about how the hospital administrators have been, handling COVID-19 and the lack of supplies that they've been having to handle, basically. And so Trump doesn't like that because it calls out his ineffective leadership and his disastrous handling of this virus. So that's why he lost it on John Karl. But John, what do you think about Bret Baier's statements there?
I guess any criticism is good. I mean, it seems like a weird thing to I guess be surprised by. This is one of the main things that the Trump supporters like him for. They like that he stands there and he gets all triggered and emotional and worked up when people point out inconvenient facts to him. And he loses it. And that's what they want, because they have been convinced that petulant emotional weakness is strength. And so he gives them that. That's the show that they want. They want a guy to freak out and lie and do his little points and things like that. That's what they want. So I guess it's good to see an anchor on Fox pointing that out. But I don't know what else he's doing on a daily basis to try to disarm that, amongst Trump supporters. I mean, to get them to be more critical of Trump, going forward, rather than just pointing out one thing. Point out the patterns, point out that this is not a random thing that Trump all of a sudden did that wasn't a part of an established pattern. This is what he does. He does it he just did it in the that's from yesterday, right? Well, he was doing it today in his press conference. He'll do it tomorrow. That's what they're watching for.
Yeah, you make such a good point. I mean, these sporadic, one-offs where a host on Fox will say something that seems, mildly critical of Trump doesn't go far enough, because if you take Fox's message as a whole, it's as if we have state-run television, right? State-run news. They do Trump's bidding. They cover up for his unconstitutional behavior. They downplay his criminal activity in some cases. And they do a disservice to their audience by misinforming them. And it's literally deadly when you're dealing with a pandemic. So while I applaud Bret Baier for doing the right thing this once in sticking up for John Karl, he needs to make that more of a habit if he cares about integrity at all, or if he cares about the responsibility that comes along with calling yourself a reporter and having a giant platform.
Yeah.
So, all right. That's what I have for you guys. That's it. That's all I'm going to do. That's all I'm going to do today.
Someday. It's been a draining day from the very beginning.
It has been for sure. Yeah. But thank you, John, for joining today. I love doing the show with you, as I've said a billion times. Sure. And thanks to everyone who's watching, for supporting, for being a member. We truly appreciate you guys. Just take a load off tonight. Take it easy. Try to, spend time with your loved ones at home. And we'll see you tomorrow. We'll do this again tomorrow.